In this presentation, I will discuss world Englishes in the expanding circle with a specific focus on the Vietnamese context. More specifically, I will look at how English is changing in Vietnam through language policies, EMI programs, technology, artificial intelligence, and advertising. The presentation has four main parts. First, I will discuss English language policies and the growth of EMI in Vietnam. Second, I will point out some critical challenges, such as educational inequity, digital divide, examination pressure, native speaker norms, and teacher burden. Third, I will examine current issues, especially the impact of AI and digital technology on English learning. Finally, I will discuss some pedagogical implications for ELT and analyze how English is used symbolically in Vietnamese advertising. Let me begin with English language policies and the growth of EMI in Vietnam. To begin with, English in Vietnam is no longer viewed only as a traditional foreign language. In the past, English was often treated mainly as a school subject. Students learned English in order to pass exams, complete grammar exercises, or meet graduation requirements. However, today English has become much more than that. It is increasingly seen as a key skill for academic mobility, employment, and international integration. This shift is also supported by national language policies. For example, the National Foreign Language Project from 2017 to 2025 aimed to improve foreign language teaching and learning across the education system. More recently, there has also been a new policy direction from 2025 to 2035, which aims to move English closer to the role of a second language in schools. At the university level, we can also see the expansion of EMI, or English Medium Instruction, and English Enhanced programs. Many universities now use English to teach some courses, develop international programs, or improve their global image. So, in this context, English is linked not only to language learning, but also to internationalization, institutional prestige, and graduate employability. However, the expansion of English and EMI also creates several important challenges. The first challenge is educational inequity, especially the digital divide. Urban students often have better access to English centers, private tutoring, international materials, digital platforms, and AI learning tools. In contrast, rural students may have fewer learning opportunities and weaker access to technology. As a result, the spread of English may not benefit all learners equally. It may even widen the gap between students from different social and economic backgrounds. The second challenge is examination pressure. In Vietnam, English is strongly connected to high-stakes exams, certificates, university admission, graduation requirements, and job opportunities. Because of this, students may learn English mainly to get scores or certificates, rather than to communicate in real situations. This can make English learning too test-oriented. The third challenge is the continuing influence of native speaker norms. Although English is now used by many multilingual speakers around the world, British or American English is still often treated as the ideal model. This may turn native speaker English into a gatekeeping standard. In other words, students may feel that their English is not good enough simply because they do not sound like native speakers. Finally, EMI may also create pressure for teachers and lecturers.
In EMI classrooms, lecturers have to teach complex subject content and use English at the same time. This can be difficult. If students' English level is not strong enough, lecturers may simplify the content, and this may affect the depth of academic learning. Another major issue today is the impact of technology and artificial intelligence. On the positive side, AI can support language learning in many ways. For example, AI tools can provide personalized learning, instant feedback, speaking practice, grammar correction, and even auto-scoring for productive skills. This can make English learning more flexible and accessible. However, generative AI also creates a new challenge. Tools such as ChatGPT and machine translation can now generate, translate, and revise English texts very quickly. This changes the meaning of language learning. In the past, if a student could write a good English paragraph, we assumed that they had strong writing ability. But now, if a student submits a very fluent paragraph, we may need to ask, did the student really write this? Did AI help? And if AI helped, what exactly should we assess? Because of this, we need to ask new questions. Why should students learn English now? How should English be taught in the age of AI? And what counts as real English ability? Another major change is that English is no longer found only in textbooks. Students now encounter English in social media, online games, YouTube videos, AI tools, global entertainment. So, language learning today is not only about textbook literacy, it is also about transmedia literacy, the ability to understand and use English across different digital spaces. In many expanding circle contexts, including Vietnam, students learn English for very practical reasons. They learn English for jobs, higher education, international mobility, and participation in the global economy. This is what we can call instrumental motivation. In simple terms, students learn English because English gives them access to future opportunities. However, workplace English is not only about grammar accuracy or exam scores. In real communication, learners need more than correct grammar. They need pragmatic competence. They need to understand context, negotiate meaning, adapt to different speakers, and complete real communicative tasks. For example, in a workplace meeting, a Vietnamese speaker may need to communicate with colleagues from Japan, Korea, India, Singapore, or Germany. In that situation, the goal is not to sound like a native speaker. The goal is to communicate clearly, respectfully, and effectively. At the same time, the spread of English does not mean that Vietnamese should be replaced. English can be positioned as an additional multilingual resource. In other words, Vietnamese remains central to local identity, culture, and national communication, while English can support wider international communication. So, the main shift here is from English as native speaker imitation to English as a practical multilingual resource. This leads us to Global English's Language Teaching, or GELT. GELT suggests that English language teaching should change its goal. Traditionally, the goal of ELT was often native-like proficiency. Students were expected to imitate British or American English in pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, and cultural norms. However, from a Global English's perspective, this may no longer be realistic or necessary. Instead, the goal should be flexible, intelligible, and intercultural communication.
The key word here is intelligibility. Intelligibility means that people can understand each other successfully. In this view, non-native-like forms should not automatically be treated as errors if communication is still successful. For example, a student may speak English with a Vietnamese accent, but if the message is clear, then communication is still effective. This also has implications for pronunciation assessment. Pronunciation should not be assessed mainly based on accent imitation. The goal is not to erase local accents. The goal is to help learners speak clearly enough for mutual understanding. Another important point is the role of models. Students should not only learn from British or American native speakers, they can also learn from successful English users from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds. This is important because in real life, many English interactions happen between non-native speakers. Another implication is that English-only policies may not always be the best choice, especially in EMI classrooms. In some classrooms, teachers may believe that students should use only English. However, when academic content is difficult, students' first language can be very useful. Vietnamese can help students understand complex concepts, discuss ideas, and connect new knowledge with what they already know. This idea is related to translanguaging. Translanguaging means that students use all their linguistic resources to make meaning. They may read in English, discuss some ideas in Vietnamese, take notes in both languages, and then present their understanding in English. This does not mean that students are weak. It means that they are using their full multilingual ability to support learning. Students also need exposure to different English varieties. They should hear not only British and American accents, but also Asian Englishes and ELF interactions. For example, they may need to understand English spoken by Vietnamese, Singaporean, Indian, Korean, Japanese, or Thai speakers. This is closer to real international communication. Finally, ELT should also include intercultural awareness. If English is used across cultures, then students need to learn how to communicate flexibly with people from different cultural backgrounds. So English teaching should move beyond fixed Anglo-American cultural models. It should prepare learners for diverse and flexible intercultural interaction. Now I would like to move to another area where English is very visible, advertising. In expanding circle countries, English in advertising is not always used mainly for direct communication. Sometimes the audience may not even need English to understand the basic message. Instead, English is used for symbolic value. It can suggest modernity, prestige, luxury, globalization, and cosmopolitan identity. For example, when a product or a building project uses an English name, it may sound more international, more fashionable, or more high class. This shows that English is not only a language, it is also part of image building. In this case, English is shaped not only by education policy, but also by market forces. Businesses use English because it can create a certain image and attract consumers. So English spreads not only from the top down through government policy, but also from the bottom up through media, branding, advertising, and consumer culture. Now let us look at two examples from the Vietnamese advertising context. The first case is luxury real estate. Some examples are the Global City, Mastery Grand View, and Ego Central Park. Here is my question for the class. Why are English names used to sell real estate to Vietnamese consumers in Vietnam? I think one possible answer is that English functions as a symbolic marker. It creates an image of class, modernity, global lifestyle, and elite consumer identity. In other words, English is not only giving information, it is helping to sell a dream. It suggests that the project is modern, international, and connected to a global lifestyle. Another case is VinFast with the slogan "Boundless Together." Here is another question. Why does a Vietnamese brand use an English slogan for both domestic and international branding? One possible answer is that English helps VinFast appear global, future-oriented, and internationally competitive. The English slogan helps the brand move beyond a purely local image. It suggests that VinFast wants to be seen as a global player. From these two cases, we can ask 3 extra questions. First, is English really necessary here? Second, what image does English create? And third, who is included or excluded by this use of English? These questions are important because English can create prestige, but it can also create distance. Some consumers may feel attracted by English, while others may feel excluded if they cannot fully understand it. So advertising shows us that English in Vietnam is not only about communication, it is also about identity, class, aspiration, and market value. To conclude, the main message of my presentation is this. English in Vietnam should not be taught simply as imitation of British or American norms. Of course, British and American English are still important varieties. However, they should not be the only models for English learning. A better direction is to teach English as a flexible, multilingual, and intercultural resource. This means that ELT in Vietnam should prepare learners for more than exams. They need to communicate intelligibly. They need to use AI critically. They need to understand different English varieties, and they need to participate confidently in multilingual global contexts. In short, English is important for education, employment, technology, and global communication. But English should not be seen only as a native speaker language. It should be seen as a shared resource that Vietnamese learners can use in their own way for their own academic, professional, and intercultural purposes. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.